Think it's going to go a certain way, but actually once you start it and it all falls apart and you have to change on the fly, and you've still got to get it done.
The Repair Shop has quietly become one of the BBC's most beloved shows since it first aired in 2017, drawing millions every week. But what really sets it apart? It's not just about fixing old objects. It's about restoring memories, family histories, and sometimes even lost pieces of people's hearts. Behind the scenes, experts like Steve and Susie Fletcher work their magic because the story behind the scenes is far from what you expect. The ship's wheel that held a family secret for over 60 years. Some items brought into the Repair Shop are more than just broken. They're full of untold stories. And Tony's ship's wheel was exactly that. Tony arrived at the barn with a quiet, nervous energy. In his hands, he held what looked like a pile of old wood and rusted metal, but to him, it was everything. The ship's wheel had once belonged to an old Scottish fishing boat that had been in his family for generations. It was passed down from his grandfather, through his mother, and now to him. He didn't bring it in just for a repair. He brought it in hoping to reconnect with a part of his family history that felt like it was slipping away. Tony explained the wheel's story to woodwork expert Will Kirk. "It's in bits," he said with a shaky voice, "but it means so much to me." He went quiet for a second and added, "It doesn't look like a lot, but this was part of my family's life. My mom kept it safe after the boat was scrapped. It's one of the only things we have left." Will understood immediately. This wasn't just a repair job. It was a piece of heritage that needed to be saved with care. The restoration took time. Will carefully reassembled the broken spokes, restored the weathered wood, and polished every detail until the wheel looked like it could steer a ship once again. But he made sure it didn't look too new. He wanted it to still feel like it had lived a full life. When Tony returned for the big reveal, he took one look at the restored wheel and broke down in tears. "Thank you," he whispered, barely able to speak. "I'm overcome, to be honest. It's magical." That moment reminded everyone watching. This show isn't about objects. It's about people, memory, and holding on to the things that connect us to those we've lost. And just when you think you've seen it all, along comes a timepiece that defied logic. A 400-year-old clock with a history that left even the experts speechless. The 400-year-old clock that ticked back to life. One of the most jaw-dropping moments in the Repair Shop's history came when Frank Black, an engineer from Glasgow, walked in carrying what looked like a humble, dusty clock. But this wasn't just any clock. It was 400 years old, crafted way back in 1650 by the renowned clockmaker Thomas Looms. For anyone who loves history or antiques, this was like a dream find. Frank explained to Steve Fletcher, the show's expert clock restorer, that this clock had been in his family for generations. It was more than an object. It was a piece of their heritage, a connection to the past that no one could replace. But after centuries of use and neglect, it had stopped working long ago, its hands frozen in time. Steve knew this would be no ordinary repair. Restoring a clock from the mid-17th century is a delicate, precise art. Every gear, every spring, and every piece of wood had to be handled with care, respecting its age and history. Steve described the clock as really special, not just because of its age, but because it represented an era when timekeeping was both a science and an art form. After careful examination, Steve realized the clock needed a new pendulum and a replacement weight, parts that are crucial to its movement but hard to replicate for something so old. Using traditional techniques, he crafted parts that matched the original design as closely as possible. It took patience and skill, but finally, the moment everyone waited for arrived. The clock began to tick again. Hearing the first steady tick from a clock silent for centuries was emotional for everyone in the barn, especially Frank. "It's like bringing my ancestors back to life," he said softly. "I never thought I'd hear this clock working again." But the show's emotional moments didn't stop there. In another unforgettable episode, a deeply personal Jewish prayer book came in for repair, carrying a story just as powerful as the clocks. The Jewish prayer book that carried a family's heartbreak and hope. Sometimes, the repair shop isn't just about fixing old objects. It's about healing the invisible wounds tied to those objects. One of the most heartbreaking and powerful stories came when Gary Fisher brought in a fragile Jewish prayer book. This wasn't just any book. It was a precious family heirloom, soaked with history, pain, and resilience. Gary explained that this prayer book had belonged to his Jewish grandparents. They were sent to a concentration camp called Theresienstadt in 1938, located in what was then Czechoslovakia. Gary, a child at the time, had been safely evacuated to the United Kingdom, but his grandparents faced horrors he could hardly imagine. Theresienstadt was no ordinary camp. It was what the Nazis called a show camp. Unlike the brutal conditions of many other camps, Theresienstadt was designed to deceive the world. The Nazis allowed certain prisoners to keep some of their belongings, including this prayer book, to create a false image of humane treatment. For Gary's grandparents, holding on to their prayer book was a lifeline, a rare, precious symbol of faith and identity amid overwhelming loss. But just a short distance from Theresienstadt, the story darkened further. Other members of Gary's family were sent to a different camp. His great-grandparents, his grandfather's sister, and even a 10-year-old nephew were imprisoned there. And tragically, they were killed in gas chambers. Gary's story wasn't just about the prayer book. It was about survival in the face of unimaginable loss and the courage to carry their memory forward. When Gary brought the prayer book to the repair shop, its condition reflected everything it had endured. The pages were torn and fragile, the leather binding worn thin from years of use and sorrow. This was not a repair that could be rushed or treated lightly. It needed deep care and understanding of what the book represented. That's where Christopher Shaw, the expert bookbinder, stepped in. With patient hands and a quiet reverence, Christopher delicately worked to restore the fragile pages and reinforce the binding. Every stitch was a promise to preserve the prayer book's history, its spirit, and the weight of the memories it carried. When Gary finally saw the restored prayer book, he was overwhelmed. Tears welled up as he held it gently. "It's like a piece of my grandparents is alive again," he whispered. That moment wasn't just about fixing an object. It was about restoring a family's memory, identity, and hope. It showed how even after the darkest times, faith and family can survive and heal. The repair shop continues to be much more than a place for antiques. It's a place where stories live on, where healing happens quietly, and where every restoration touches a human heart. Thanks for watching, fam. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Check out the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you might discover next.